This is Chris Roberts. I do want to thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation, FHIR, What's All the Fuss? Our speaker today is Jeff McGath. Jeff is the Senior Vice President of Software Solutions at iAtric Systems. He has more than 16 years of healthcare IT experience, including 8 years dedicated to medical device integration. Jeff co-founded Accent on Integration in 2006 before joining iAtric Systems in 2013. He's also co-chair of IHE's Patient Care Device Technical Committee. Now I'll turn it over to Jeff to get us started.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to everyone that has joined us today. Sorry about that little mix-up there with the intros, but Chris did a great job jumping in, taking over. Let me go ahead and get started with an agenda slide. What I'd like to do during today's webcast, we'll define some goals for the presentation. I'd like to give an overview of FHIR, talk about the capabilities and benefits of FHIR, then what FHIR means to you and how you might be able to help your organization with this emerging technology. And then finally, we'll talk about how to leverage legacy systems to change the way we deliver healthcare with FHIR. So, you know, what that last bullet point, I intend to talk about, you know, non-FHIR enabled systems and how we can use the technology to start seeing some benefit. What's not on the agenda at the very end of the presentation, I do have a couple of use cases. So we'll take what all we've learned through the overview and capabilities and apply it to a couple of use cases and try to connect the dots there. All right, so goals for today. What you'll learn, this session will help you understand what a FHIR resource is and how it can be used. FHIR is designed for the web, so what I want this session to do is kind of explain those simple XML, JSON data structures that are used and how we're using existing, you know, web HTTP protocols, and then how that could be used in a Meditech environment that still may be, you know, using some traditional 2.x messaging. And then we'll also cover a few use cases. I mentioned that it wasn't on our agenda, but I've got a few at the end that'll show how this FHIR standard could be used to accelerate some third-party app integration. So this next slide, kind of a fun quiz. If you were at the Muse event, we did this. I've changed it a little bit for this web-based demonstration, but if you know the answer here, you can type it into chat real quick. My question is, one of the goals of FHIR is to help solve the following healthcare challenge. So it's 16 letters, 8 syllables. I'll start putting in a few of the words here, and then neat little hint. If you Google this word, you'll get I think Google reports back 14 million hits, but it's really a top concern for all of us. I'll go ahead and fill it in here. Interoperability. That's really one of the goals that, you know, FHIR's out there to help solve, do a better job of producing interoperable solutions and allowing us to build things that we all, you know, we throw this word around a lot, interoperability, but it is one of the at the core, one of the big challenges it's trying to address. So I get this question a lot, you know, FHIR, is it a standard? And I found this little cartoon on the web back earlier this year. I thought it was a pretty good analogy here of what we may see going on in the industry. Some people think of FHIR this way. I certainly hope it doesn't end up being this way, but you can see the little comic there where you've got a couple of engineers talking, and you know, they decide we need to develop this one universal standard. Yeah, that's right. And then you know, coming soon, the situation is you've got 15 competing standards instead of 14. I think every industry's seen this to some extent. In the parentheses at top, you know, you can see some of the different technologies that maybe fell into this loop on different times in their life cycle. our chargers, and I think we're still struggling with chargers and how an Android device can't use an iPhone device's charger, things like that. But neat comic, is FHIR a standard? Well, by the end of current plans, by the end of 2016, we hope to have the normative edition of the first FHIR standard out and publicly available. So it will be a standard, and then the confusion around which standard to use, I think, will be driven by implementation details. What problem are you facing? What are we trying to solve? So before we get into the rest of the presentation, I wanted to do a quick poll here, and Sandy or someone else here is going to open up a poll. You should be seeing it on your screen. I wanted to find out from today's attendees what's driving your interest in FHIR. So the poll is open. The different answers there, you're wanting to make your interfaces easier to manage, or you're moving toward what you think will be a national standard, or you want to take advantage of the web services aspect of this, or maybe it's just other, don't know yet. We'll give it just a minute or two for folks to answer the poll, and once we've got a critical mass there, we'll have one of the organizers close this poll, see the results, look at those real quick, and then we can move on. All right, so we've closed the poll. So it looks like the results I'm seeing, 50% of the folks are in the other, or I wouldn't say it's don't know, but the other category of what's driving your interest in FHIR. The next leading candidate there is you're moving toward what you think will be a national standard. That's what I would have assumed coming into this session today. That was most likely the case. So let me do, taking that, other approach as the biggest respondent, I'll try to drill into areas that I think may be of interest to today's attendees. So I'll get started with a FHIR overview. So FHIR, the acronym, stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource. A lot of people out there are starting to think of it as like HL7 v4. That's not in any official document. That's not anything HL7.org is behind, but I've seen it on many of the blogs, and then just conversational whenever I'm at different industry or trade show events, and we're having just colleagues stand around and discuss. I've heard that term thrown around a little bit, thinking of this as V4 of HL7. But what's important to note is FHIR is an HL7.org initiative. It was born in the HL7.org group, and I've listed three of the founders: Graham Grieve, Ewald Kramer, and Lloyd McKenzie. Those three gentlemen are, some people look at them as the FHIR chiefs. They started this effort several years ago, continue to be very active participants and help drive the direction of FHIR as a technology and FHIR as a standard. There were some neat photographs taken at the one of the big HL7 National Convention meetings. They got those three guys to dress up in fireman uniforms and took a good PR photo of those guys. I should have had it in my slide today, but we wouldn't be where we are today without those three gentlemen's leadership and continued leadership. I know Graham just recently did an interview on HIS Talk. It's a good read if you want to go. If any of you guys follow that blog, Mr. HIS Talk, he's got a recent interview out there. Third bullet, FHIR prioritizes implementation. This is really the core of what's got the tech side of the healthcare solutions market really excited. Is a core founding principle is that the standard must maintain implementability, and all decisions about what's in the standard or what's going to be required, it always goes back to the question of who would implement this. If we put this in the standard, do we feel like 80% of all users would consider that an absolute must-have data element or required data element? It's really this focus towards the implementation and how quickly can we get things to market with a standard that's really got engineers at healthcare IT companies excited about this and putting time and energy into attending work group meetings and furthering the standard, because we see it as a way to not have as much overhead and heaviness to implementing a technology like this. It is REST and JSON based, so the REST web API approach and then JSON data structures are industry accepted technologies. This is not a HL7.org or healthcare specific technology. This, it's the same technologies that Facebook and Twitter and big international IT solutions are built around. So we have a very skilled workforce that is comfortable with these technologies, and they've been very time tested and put through heavy transaction load and proven to be great technologies. And then finally, there's an 80-20 rule. I briefly touched on that when I was talking about implementation priority, but the 80-20 rule, the group is just wanting to define what is absolutely needed. Everybody agrees that a patient identifier must be in place and certain demographics must be in place, but if a particular topic area or data element gets to a point where there's discussion around its implementability or need, we're always going to fall back to that 80-20 rule. Do we feel that 80% of all adopters of FHIR would require and need that particular data element or topic? If not, then we still have the ability to pull in that data and leverage it, but it's covered by something that FHIR defines as extensions. And I'll get into, I'll make a better reference and kind of give you a bridge from HL7.2.x lingo to FHIR that does I think you'll understand what an extension is. I thought it would be important today to call out that ONC, through their interoperability roadmap, they are behind FHIR. You can see in the red section there the standards for interoperability. They do have FHIR named as a technology and a standard that they see in the roadmap as a required element for doing system-to-system integration. It's as we see the meaningful use programs ramp down after we get through stage 3. This roadmap that the ONC has worked on for a few years is going to become our measuring stick for continuing to drive innovation and advancing the healthcare IT industry. And it's really nice to see that they've already got a kind of a bullseye around FHIR as a needed and required element of that interoperability challenge that we all face. So let me go in and do some comparisons now. We'll kind of take a really high-level comparison to HL7 version 2.x. So you can, I think most folks on the call today, we're all healthcare IT career folks. We've been around the industry for a while. We're probably very comfortable with the 2.x lingo and driven by messaging, and messages are comprised of segments, and segments are comprised of fields. So you can think of segments like a PID segment or an OBX segment as URLs. that's a good high-level way to start making kind of a crosswalk between 2.x healthcare messaging and FHIR. So you can see the value of REST right here. We've got a URL. There's no expectation that any state has been stored before, between, or after a call to this URL. There's a URL. If you pass this URL an identifier, it could return you demographic info about a patient. In my mocked up example here of a patient read URL. So URLs will exist to get data, create data, update data, and even deletes are possible as well. And then Z segments. We've all seen maybe an overuse of Z segments, but Z segments were needed many times when systems just vendor-to-vendor connectivity. We needed to communicate maybe different concepts, things that weren't exactly in the standard yet, or they were, but we didn't have the ability to pull in the different message sets, and so people would fall back to a Z segment approach. And with FHIR, think of Z segments as extensions. It's that piece of data or that healthcare topic area that's in a intended solution that didn't make the 80-20 rule. It didn't fall into the 80%, so it's not in the defined FHIR spec. So you're free to go out, create an extension to cover that need. And then traditional HL7 messaging, they also had this bundled concept where you could have many segments in a single message. You could have many messages in a batch transmission. FHIR supports the same messaging style. They call that a bundled resource. So those are a few high-level comparisons to HL7 2.x. And what I'd like to do next is go through a little bit of an analogy. This slide's going to have many animations on it, but it's an analogy of really what is FHIR, and boiling it down to the architectural pieces of the server, the resource. So you can think of a FHIR server as a room at your hospital, maybe your medical records department, a room full of filing cabinets, and all of those cabinets represent the FHIR server. So you could have a cabinet for patient forms, order forms, observation forms, and then you pull a set of folders out of the patient forms filing cabinet and then drill yourself down to an individual folder. That would be a patient resource. In the lingo of the FHIR world and FHIR standard, now we have our hands on an individual patient resource. So imagine if you could walk up to the room. The room is guarded by the file clerk, and you just talk to the file clerk. That's your way to interact with all the data that's in that room. So some of the things you may ask or request or want from that person or that FHIR server is you may want to do a search. Hey, I need you to search through all the folders for ones that meet a certain set of search criteria, or read a specific folder back to me. I've got an identifier. I need you to tell me, all the data. Do a create. I need you to create a new folder in the appropriate cabinet. Updates, deletes, history. That's an interesting one. Look at all the pages in a single folder. So maybe that patient resource folder is full of information. I need you to look at all the pages. That's a typical request that we have in healthcare solutions today. Or you may just provide and want to execute a transaction. Give that server a bunch of different folders all at once to update in a certain manner or a certain order. What's interesting here, all of those actions that I've highlighted in red, those represent FHIR RESTful API endpoints. You could think of each one of those items in red as a different URL. and again, I'm using that patient example. If that's a mocked up URL that I put together, but that could be an example of a read from that list below. So again, what's all the fuss? And I mentioned it earlier. It's on the implementation ease. We're not bogging down the solution building capability with a bunch of spec overhead. I think we've all seen, different spec documents. You can look at the hl7.org documents for, just ADT, and it's many, many, many pages long. Lots of different segments mentioned. Many of those segments, when you start drilling in, data fields that are required, and we face problems in the healthcare environment that we're trying to create, point solutions for, where we know that for this particular workflow solution that we're trying to put in place, we never need to know what a patient's guarantor info is. I don't care if it's required or not. I don't need it. I'm just trying to surface a list of patients to the front desk folks that are handling traffic for gift delivery. There are a lot of opportunities there for us to pull overhead off of the messaging spec and allow the implementers to really get focused on what's the problem that we're trying to solve in this particular use case. The other item that's causing all the fuss and has the interest of our engineers and scientists that are working on integration patterns here is that we're using RESTful web services. And these technology itself, it's embraced by many industries. You heard me talk about some of the big international solutions, social media that have been using these types of technologies. We're opening our healthcare industry up to a lot of the new and emerging, I'll go ahead and hit it, Generation Y type companies. They're able to come into healthcare, be very disruptive with some of their thoughts and ideas, and leverage the new technologies that maybe their engineers and developers are already very accustomed to using, because they just came to this company from a Facebook or Twitter, and they understand these technologies, and they're bringing maybe a different view, and we're getting a lot of cross-pollination now happening with healthcare IT, because we're able to reach across the aisle and maybe look at Gen Y companies or newer developers that don't have to have the 5 or 10 years of domain expertise around an HL7 spec. And then another exciting piece of this, it kind of dovetails with the Gen Y company thought there, is that mHealth technologies, they're going to be easier to create, connect. I really do think it's going to result in a pretty quick advancement of that patient-centered healthcare system. We're going to be able to see companies that come in and start producing, I call it disruptive, but very new and innovative solutions, maybe in the iOS space. So you've got it on your iPhone or in the Android platform. But just having this type of more open, less heavy technology framework to exchange data in healthcare, I think it's really going to result in our ability to push new and unique solutions to the market quicker. And then another item that many of you may have heard about is the Argonaut project. And when it first started getting talked about last fall, there was some confusion. Folks were thinking it was maybe a competing initiative, and that wasn't the case at all. The Argonaut project was predominantly staffed by the vendor community. I know Epic, Cerner, Athena Health, Meditech, they all put engineering resources in on the Argonaut project, but it's another telling sign here of what all the fuss is. Those big vendors saw the appropriateness and the how big a deal this could be, the FHIR standard and the FHIR technology, that they came to the table, formed up this Argonaut project, and their goal was, let's see if we can accelerate the effort here. HL7.org and the three founding folks that I mentioned early in the presentation, we all rely on volunteers to attend working group meetings and to take time out of their day job back at Siemens or Cerner or Meditech to give back and spend time in these working group committees. And the Argonaut project was an effort by the industry and the vendor community to come in and augment that. Let's bring some dedicated resources. And last fall, they really wanted to get focused around mapping data in the FHIR spec to the common meaningful use data set. So we'll talk about some of the capabilities and benefits here. And these are more use cases, what ifs. If someone was building a new iOS healthcare app, something run on the iPhone, thousands of people are looking to do that. What standard would we point them at? What if somebody was trying to provide a cloud-based health application, integrates with social networks? What standard would we tell them to use? Where would we point them? If a vendor wanted to provide a simple API-based, cloud health integration service, where would we tell them to go and look, and what should they base their engineering effort around? Or if the government wanted to implement a national EHR, who should they talk to? What should they look at? A lot of people in the community are saying FHIR is a kind of a key component linchpin to many of these use cases that many of us may feel like it's a bit of the industry dreaming, but it does tend to be the case right now. So I want to use this same slide title, capabilities and benefits, and I want to temper it a bit with the current state of the standards work. Currently, FHIR is still at a DSTU1 version. That stands for Draft Standard for Trial Use. The Draft Standard for Trial Use version 2 it is expected this year. Current plans were to have that ballot completed by the end of July. We're just a little bit behind there, but it is still expected to be out this year. Now, an interesting item here is the Gartner hype cycle. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this term and this item that Gartner has communicated with several different technologies before, but what they've shown is that any technology, any new technology, it always goes through this type of hype cycle where you'll start out with some technology trigger. Maybe that was storage space. I can remember the day when we had computers whose storage was measured in how many K you had, and today we talk terabytes. But there's a technology trigger, and then as that technology matures, you eventually reach this peak of inflated expectations. Oh my gosh, this thing will make your coffee in the morning. It will do everything. Then once you reach that peak and enough people have jumped on board the technology and people start putting time and effort around implementation and let me see if I can build something around this, you quickly start reaching and bottom out through what they call a trough of disillusionment. This is just kind of the sales and hype and what could be meeting real world delivery capabilities and you bottom out a little bit, but then there's always the slope of enlightenment where people now understand the technology you're putting in front of me. I understand this new disk drive, spindle disk technology, and advancements are made, and eventually that technology will reach its plateau of productivity. So I'm going to put a highlight on this. There were several folks interviewed, many people that have spent many hours in the FHIR standards process and technology. And when you ask them, where do you think we're at today? Most of the experts think we're kind of reaching that peak. My last slide is probably a great example of that. Where would we point people if we were going to build a national EHR? Where would we point people if they were going to build any cloud-hosted app? At this point, FHIR is kind of like that hammer, and when you got a hammer in your hand, just everything looks like a nail. I think we've reached the point where there's enough interest. People are attending webcasts and webinars like today. Now the real engineering effort's going to come in, and we're going to see what can truly be done. And some of those use cases may fall by the wayside, but it's still very great, encouraging technologies and thought behind the FHIR technology. We will eventually see ourselves kind of hit this trough, build more of a base of engineering and vendor community behind it, and we will see our uptrend and enlightenment slope and reach our productivity plateau. Another thing to temper our thoughts around this is that companies are starting to implement the FHIR architecture. They're starting to. What's tough for vendor communities out there, though, it's not a full standard yet. It's a draft. Things are changing, albeit small. There are changes. So it's my thought that the great companies are not going to build deep specifics yet. They know enough about the architecture that's not going to change, that they're building some of their solutions around that. They're not getting deep into the specifics because they're either attending those work groups or have big voices into the community. They know enough. I'll use an engine company as an example, not any specific engine company, but if you were in the business to provide interface engines to the healthcare market, you may know enough to start building a lot of your platform around FHIR, but not get into details of, let's say, extensions and how extensions are managed. But it's very possible that FHIR becomes a de facto API for Meaningful Use 3. If you've spent any time looking at the proposed rule for MU3, you'll see in there peppered throughout that that document is this term API, that the vendor community is charged with creating an API for access to their data. And many folks that I visit with from the different vendors are all leaning towards leveraging FHIR to become their API so that they can just publish a FHIR server, and if you need access to orders or patients or medication reconciliation type processes, you would go to the FHIR server where they've got support for those types of read, update, create transactions. So what does FHIR mean to you? How could it help your organization? I believe that it opens the marketplace for new healthcare IT entrants. So I called them the Gen Y companies earlier. I think what you'll see is more and more kind of new players in healthcare IT coming to the market, proposing solutions that may have never been feasible or even thought of before. I think we'll see it really explode with the mobility type solutions. I think that this technology gives hospitals some do-it-yourself, capabilities. You could, with fairly fairly easily work with your existing employees, or maybe be able to recruit, employees that understand RESTful Web API. They understand JSON data structures, because that's what's being taught in today's colleges, and they're able to come in, look at this standard, and help you stand up simple tools. Maybe there's a certain patient whiteboard or status board need in an area of your hospital, and it could be a pretty simple effort to put up a web page and have a couple of FHIR calls, and that whiteboard or status board gets updated every 30 seconds. Not having to go to a particular vendor or any one vendor to create those things. I do think, for very targeted use cases, you would have the ability to do some of that DIY, do-it-yourself approach. It's going to open access to your EHR data. I'm going to reference that language in the MU3 proposed rule, the requirement to have an API for anyone that's going to certify and say that their system is, EHR certified technology. They have to have an API. It seems to be where things are headed are those vendors knowing that they need to embrace and use FHIR. They're kind of looking at this as a way to kill two birds with one stone. If they're going to be required to have an API to be certified, and they see this huge, evolving interest and excitement and growth around FHIR, then let's make our API FHIR-based. And what that means to you, that's going to open up access to your EHR data. If there is this web-based RESTful, API to get in and look at some of your Meditech or Cerner or Epic or, McKesson data, you should be able to have some connectability there through that API that would be FHIR-based. And I believe that what FHIR represents to you is an accelerator for the healthcare consumer movement. I know many of you are challenged with engaging your patients, engaging them outside the walls of your healthcare system, and having the ability to get quick access to data in a payload, a package that's not a HL7 pipes and carrots, 2.x format. You can work with vendors or technology firms that can deliver solutions that help you accelerate that consumer movement, providing them access into some of your quality data that you wish to share, or showing them ED wait times, or any number of things, diabetes management, educational offerings, and tying that back to some of their own data if that's a chronic condition that they have. These are all very pointed use case solutions that I believe a standard such as FHIR is going to accelerate, simply because we don't have to know everything and be able to communicate everything in a message, knowing that for the solution you're trying to roll out the door, I don't care about the guarantor, I don't care about the insurance. So I do believe it will accelerate that movement. So how could you leverage your existing systems using FHIR? And I put up just a most basic representation of what's probably in place at many healthcare systems today. Hospitals, you've got a core EHR system. It could be any of the big vendors. And then those systems, this middle block here with the yellow database icons, many times that's just a part of this EHR, but I've split it out into a separate box just to, provide the concept. There's an EHR, there's a data store of some type. It may be the data repository that's internal to the EHR. It may be a data repository effort that you've had in place for a few years at your healthcare system. For those folks on the call from Meditech, it may be at your Meditech DR that you have in place. but those are all sources of data, maybe tied directly to the EHR or ones that you've stood up yourself. And then what I've talked about today is there's this concept of the FHIR server. And the FHIR server is what's going to communicate to all these new consumers that we'll see pop up. You know, maybe they're mobile-based consumers or telehealth solutions, pop health type solutions, or maybe they're just internal workflow improvement initiatives at the hospital. But all of those topic areas are considered candidates to be FHIR consumers. So, simple diagram, but if you really think about it, that area of interest is going to be these big arrows here. How does the data from existing repositories get over to a FHIR server? And this is where we'll see many healthcare vendors may roll that into their data repository or their EHR solution and just have a FHIR server API that you can hit. Some vendors are probably going to rely on some of the third-party integrator market to come in and service this need and bridge the gap. Maybe this is a direct database read converted over to FHIR server repositories. Maybe it's a conversion of HL7 2.x to FHIR. But I wanted to show you what at IATRIX Systems we've taken the approach. We've got code working today where we are working with that either the DR or data repository doing conversion from the 2.x messaging, as well as doing direct clinical data modeling ourselves to support FHIR-based resources, you know, patient resource, scheduling, orders, things of that manner. It's not anything that you know, we're putting out there as commercially available yet. We're kind of taking the same approach of letting the standard continue to go through this, you know, last year of maturity. But we also didn't want to be waiting until the recipe or cookbook is completely baked before we start our work either. I'll get into a couple of use cases here. It looks like we're doing pretty good on time. We've got about 15 minutes left. We'll certainly have enough time for some questions at the end. So this first use case, what I'm envisioning here is a patient engagement workflow. We hear a lot about, you know, patient engagement services. So in my use case, a patient's on their mobile device and they receive a push notification that their, you know, annual physicals due. I know mine's coming up. And, you know, imagine if in that notification and in that app, that Android or iOS app, there's a suggestion there that the patient should schedule and complete a calcium heart scan, you know, before you visit the doc. And then on that same, in that same app, the patient is presented with, you know, buttons where you could schedule the heart scan as well as the annual physical. So what would be going on behind the scenes there if we tried to break this down and make it a complete FHIR-based solution? So I've got some bullets at the bottom. All of the items in red, think of those as the web API endpoints. You know, we need to do a create, a search, another create, and a read. Everything in green are the actual resources that we would be invoking, the FHIR resources. So the very first step, we'd need to create actor resources for the patient, the provider, what service, and the locations. And then, once we have those resources created, we could do a search. You know, search the schedule resources for all of those actors. The actors being the patient, the provider, you know, the service location. And look for available slots. So on that mobile app that the patient just got their notification, they could see that, oh, it looks like there's a slot next Thursday at 2, 4 o'clock, and on Friday. But the the user is going to be able to, page up and down through the list of available scheduled slots that are open. And then they could, once they select which one works for them behind the scenes, we would be doing a create on an appointment resource with, the desired parameters of next Thursday at 2 o'clock. The last piece in that workflow would then be the mobile device waiting to receive the appointment response resource back from the FHIR server, letting them know if it was indeed selected or still available. I know many of you have probably seen, Ticketmaster is a good example. When you want to go and buy tickets to maybe a sporting event or a concert, you're given the option of, hey, here's some seats that are available, and they're available to you for the next 3 minutes guaranteed. So kind of that thought going on with appointment scheduling. Hey, here are some available slots, and as long as you interact with me in an acceptable amount of time, I can guarantee that this slot's available. And then once you get the appointment response resource back, that would be your confirmation that you're booked for next Thursday. You display that confirmation to the user, and then possibly do some other things. Maybe integrate that with your personal calendar running on your device. That's not a FHIR task, but that's what the Gen Y type companies and our existing companies, our big healthcare IT vendors, are going to be able to start producing these types of applications, make them more commonplace. The next use case I have is more of in the hospital clinical setting. So this is an example of a hospital workflow process improvement. Let's say you've got phlebotomists that are currently out and rounding, obtaining specimens. The typical workflow is that phlebotomist comes into the lab, they kind of get their call sheet, their run sheet. It's a printout. Hey, we need to go collect specimens on these, 15 patients. Here it is, and each patient maybe has a different type of draw that needs to be made. But then the, phlebotomist leaves and may not make it back to the lab for 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, because they're, out running around the hospital doing their work. Well, in this use case, when the phlebotomist arrives at the bedside, before he takes the next draw on a patient, he could scan the patient's wristband, and that would initiate a query response workflow back into the LIS. Our goal there is just to determine, is the current order set that I have on my printout, is that still, the most current and valid order set? Maybe something's happened since I've left the lab. So we can give that phlebotomist at the bedside real-time data. Yes, that is what needs to be done here. Or no, there's been a separate order. Now I need you to get 2 vials pulled. So that's just preventing that phlebotomist from having to reach out, go back to the room, engage with the patient again, have to stick the patient again. So patient satisfaction elements at play there as well when you can put that kind of a process improvement in place. So we've talked about the red and the green. The red being kind of the RESTful web API. We'd do a search of the patient resource. We'd do a search of the order resources for that given patient, and then we'd pull a history on the order resource just to make sure that my operational data that I've got here in my hand still matches the real world. So that phlebotomist is able to confirm that his printed order is still up to date, or if not, get the most current specimen collection activities completed right there at the bedside. So those are my 2 use cases. We've got a few minutes here. I know we wanted to direct questions to our question window inside of the meeting widget. I'd like to move to that portion of our presentation, and we'll, feel free to, in chat or in the questions window, submit your questions. Happy to answer them.
Great, Jeff. Thank you so much. I do want to remind everyone that, yes, if you do have a question, please do enter it into the questions pane of your control panel. Okay. Do you think we'll see FHIR Healthcare Solutions released prior to 2017, and what will be the #1 benefit for patients?
Yep, the current schedules. You heard me say that the DSTU version 2 was supposed to be out end of July. They're a few weeks behind, but they're still looking to have that complete this year and have a normative edition, meaning full standard, out by the end of 2016. So I think the question was, would we see it by 2017? If schedules remain as they are currently set, we will see a full normative edition of the FHIR standard by 2017. Second part of that question, how do I think, what will be the patient benefit there? I truly believe that the mHealth initiative is going to be such a huge candidate for benefit from this type of technology. The boards of hospitals across the country are challenged with how are we going to do better population health, how are we going to do better patient engagement, and being able to connect with that patient outside the walls of the healthcare system are critical, but not just connecting with them, but connecting with them with data that they want to see, that they're interested in. So these Gen Y companies, we'll have lots of new entrants in the market. I'm already seeing it today with really neat technology solutions that are being developed and pushed out on the Android and iPhone devices, where maybe it's doing geospatial location services, and it knows when you're close to a hospital, or it knows when you've crossed the threshold and are inside a hospital, and it can start popping up notifications to you or showing you maps of the interior of the hospital, directing you to the lab because it knows that you've got outstanding lab orders. I think the biggest benefit, I'll wrap it up here, the biggest benefit I see happening with patients and the FHIR technology is our ability to engage them in an mHealth, mobile health fashion.
Okay. Is IATRIC engaged in developing the same box for Meditech DR?
We have, at IATRIC Systems, we have a clinical data model. We call it our ICDB, IATRIC Connect database. It represents all of the clinical data that exists in your Meditech system. It's not the same schema as the DR. It's more of a clinical data model versus the DR being kind of a warehousing model. But yes, that's what we're basing our FHIR development off of, is our current ICDB representation of a Meditech's hospital's data. We also have our DR Resource Center. We had a great webcast last week. Thomas Harlan ran that, and he talked about our DR Resource Center. Think of that as an overlay. We're providing additional views and procedures for you to get at the data that's in your Meditech DR. So either one of those are options for us for a FHIR server, but summer 2015, we're leaning on our IATRIC clinical data model there that we've pulled across from a Meditech system.
How does the FHIR architecture work with regard to replacing HL7 version 2 in a hospital, such as the most common use of the ADT coming out of a registration system? In version 2, one ADT message comes out of the registration, goes to an engine, and then is sent out to all different ancillary systems that need ADT. Is there an engine equivalent in FHIR, or do data flows go back to a point-to-point layout?
Yep, there's a few questions in there. The one thing that's important to understand is the traditional, legacy 2.x messaging that's in place today. I don't think in any of our careers we're going to see that go away. There are too many millions of lines of code written in, Meditech, Cerner, Epic around HL7 2.x messaging. So it's not FHIR is not looked at as the replacement for those existing types of messaging and transactions. It is currently being looked at as a great, if you're going to come in and you've got greenfield and you're going to do new development, then this may be a much more appropriate standard for you to use. You don't have to come in with an engineering team that's got, we all know there's a pretty steep learning curve with HL7 2.x. Even if you constrain it down to just that registration workflow with the ADT, you've got to really understand a lot of specification document to get up and running. So FHIR will be used for, new development, new solutions. We're still going to have this need for the HL7 integration engines of the world, the MRF, the CorePoint, the Quavotics, the Jaguar, engines. They're going to continue to be needed elements of a hospital's IT infrastructure for years to come. It's hard to convince large companies that have billions of dollars invested in, in their system that's built around a certain message architecture to just, well, that was, we need to redo everything, and make it all FHIR-based. So it'll be a slow transition, but I think what we'll see is new development, new solutions will leverage FHIR. And then I don't know if I heard it in that question, but I do see that those interface engine players that I mentioned, CorePoint, MRF, Quavotics, Jaguar, Iguana, all of those vendors are going to be able to kind of speak both languages. They're going to be able to, yes, I can handle your existing legacy HL7 2.x needs, but I can also service FHIR style requests as well. I think we would probably see a lot of those engine vendors undertake a crosswalk type of solution where I can take that registration ADT event that gets kicked out of the front end, after a registration clerk does their job, and that's a very, large ADT message, and convert that into maybe separate, smaller FHIR-based resources where your PAC system wants to know about the registration, but really they just want to know, 20 data elements about that patient registration and, not need the other. So I think engines will start building in, well, they already have. There's many press releases out there from engine providers saying that they have support for FHIR today. So we'll see them become dual-tracked.
Okay, Jeff, that is all the questions that we have today.
Okay, well, thank you for everyone attending. I hope that was able to give you a little more insight into what FHIR is. I looked at some of the pre-conference notes and the qualification queries we did, and I saw that many of you were coming to this meeting with just wanting to, get a high-level overview. I hope we were able to convey that today. I'll let Sandy wrap up here in just a second, but anytime you have additional questions, you can feel free to contact me directly. I'd love to, sit down and you can pick my brain, and I may pick your brain a little bit too. Talk about this technology or other exciting technologies at iAtric Systems.